Welcome to February's webinar on culture. We're going to be talking about the impact of culture on an organization's resilience. I am your speaker today, Linda Nelson, and I am the author of the Crisis Management and Communication Professional course, and as well as ICOR's new COR series of courses that we're going to be launching. And the content from this webinar comes from both part of the Crisis Management Communications Professional, as well as our culture competency area that we're launching with our new series. Well, our outcomes of the webinar, we're going to be exploring the role of culture in an organization's resilience. And it really is difficult to overestimate the importance of culture and its impact on the resilience of the organization. We're going to be looking at some of the characteristics of more resilient organizations, and also actually looking at some ways that corporate culture or organizational culture can be a risk to your organization. And finally, we're going to spend some time looking at how a hospital from Iowa here in the United States intentionally improved their culture 20 years ago and increased their resilience to a flood that caused a huge disaster throughout their region. And just as a reminder, if you have questions during the webinar, please use the questions button. If we have time at the end, we will reply to your questions online. Otherwise, we will reply to them via email to everyone who attended today so that you have answers to those questions. This webinar is also being recorded, so you can check back on Friday or Monday, and you should be able to watch the webinar again, as well as have access to the references that we use, which are really good references that you might want to take a look at, especially the case study. We're going to start the webinar with a poll, and I just have to chuckle a little bit. We don't normally ask this question, like, why are you here? But this is really, and by the way, we can only have so many choices in the webinar polls responses. But I wanted to start with this question is because we all understand that culture is a really important aspect of any organization. But do you ever feel like you actually have an impact on your organization's culture? And that's a really big question. And so sometimes when people feel that they don't have any power of anything, they don't feel it's an important topic. But I hope that by the end of the presentation today that we'll have changed your mind.
We're going to leave the poll open for a few more seconds. We have about 75% of the respondents have weighed in.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it here.
Well, I do think that 18% of you are really honest that you need your continuing education credits, which does remind me that you will receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar for 1 hour of continuing education credits, and you can use it however you would like. And I really like the fact that 82% of you just wanted to learn more about organizational resilience, and then kind of split also between wanting to be a good leader and learning about culture. Really interesting. So I always start with a definition because when we're talking about a topic like this, it's good that we're all on the same page. The most easy way to define organizational culture is the way we do things around here, and that's probably, if you've ever been to a new job or been part of any organization, you know, when you're being brought in, usually the first few days, you kind of learn the way things are done around here. But And also to let you know, there's really no single definition. This topic has been studied from a lot of different perspectives, ranging from disciplines such as anthropology, sociology, to the applied disciplines such as organizational behavior, management science, and organizational communication. If you've taken any business courses, it was probably covered in there, but we're going to use this definition, that it is a pattern of basic assumptions that are considered valid and that are taught to new members as the way to perceive, think, and feel in the organization. And it really refers to those principles that help guide decision-making and the daily practices of the organization. And they include those norms and values and conceptions that have to do with kind of the climate of the organization. And also just wanted to really focus in on the fact that culture has an effect on the efficiency, the reliability, and the well-being of the organization. These can be some of the most expensive words in business or in any organization. We have always done it that way. That's the way we do things around here. We usually said a little sarcastically, or that's not the way we do things around here, which is usually kind of said in a dejective way. And then, of course, the worst one is, doesn't matter what we say, nothing will change anyway. If you've ever studied culture, you probably are familiar with Edgar Schein. And he's got tons of great quotes and a lot of really good work in this area. But I just grabbed a few of these quotes that I thought were important. It said, the only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. If you do not manage culture, it manages you. And you may not even be aware to the extent to which this is happening. He also says, if you've been trying to make changes in how your organization works, you need to find out how the existing culture aids or hinders you. And we do not think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about. This is a really subtle quote, a really interesting thing about how things are really help to impact how you think and talk about. And he really these last two quotes I would like you to consider, and if you go back and look at this webinar again, to really think about this at the end. So in most organizational change efforts, it's much easier to draw on the strengths of a culture than to try to overcome the constraints by changing the culture. And this is probably true with any initiative, which is what are we really good at and how can we build on those strengths, versus trying to fix things that maybe will take too much energy and you can better use that time to strengthen yourself in another way. But the main thing for you to understand here is that we tend to think we can separate strategy from culture, but we fail to notice that in most organizations, strategic thinking is deeply colored by those tacit assumptions about who they are and what their mission is. And we're going to be talking a lot today about who you are and what your mission is. In purely educational manner, we talk about 3 levels of culture being your artifacts, those symbols of culture in the physical and work environment, your values, what is said and valued, and the observed behaviors, and then those assumptions, those deeply held beliefs that guide behavior and tell members how to perceive and think about things. Schein also goes on to talk about how there's 4 functions of culture. One, that it provides a sense of identity to members. It promotes a sense of commitment. The culture helps organizational members attribute sense and meaning to different events and reinforces the values of the organization. And finally, culture serves as a control mechanism for shaping behavior. I even noticed, when I was a young mother and, different kids would come over to your house and you would say, well, that's not how we do things here. And understanding even within families, you have different rules and you have different ways that you shape behavior by your expectations about how people behave. I found this picture, of course, on Google Images, and I love Google Images for a lot of reasons, but this leadership reflecting on culture kind of got my attention. And when you're thinking about your organization, are you formal versus informal? Are you even talking about yourself as a person? Are you transparent or opaque? Is your organization short-sighted or long-sighted? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? Is your organization risk-averse or risk-tolerant? Are you reactive versus proactive? This is going to impact the culture of your organization. ISO 22316 is a guidance document that, if you haven't heard of it, was developed on organizational resilience to identify its principles and attributes. And ICOR created a model based off of the standard and its different areas that they talked about. And we established 3 primary environments that impact organizational resilience. which are leadership and strategy, culture and behaviors, and preparedness and managing risk. And we're going to talk today about the culture and behaviors. I'm going to talk specifically about what makes a healthy culture and how sharing information and continual improvement are really important strategies to having a good culture and having the correct behaviors. And then lastly, we have some behaviors that we identified as being present in more resilient organizations. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but you're welcome to look at the model on our website. So let's look a little bit more at the culture and behaviors. A healthy culture exists when you have core values and behaviors that support the health and welfare of its employees, where it fosters creativity, and you empower your employees to communicate effectively. And another important behavior is that you share information, where information and knowledge is shared to enable decision-making, learning from experience and learning from others, and that information and knowledge is recognized as a critical resource of the organization. And this last bullet, which I think is really important, is that it's a culture that values learning over blame. So when something bad happens, you're not looking to blame, but you're looking to how can you learn from it. And everywhere you go, you talk about continual improvement. It's almost like something you say at the end of each sentence when you're talking about managing change and doing things, and especially in different management system standards. This idea of continual improvement is a very real aspect. But to continually improve means you need to monitor your performance. So this idea of having a culture of continual improvement means you're going to be constantly or continually monitoring your performance. When you're looking at building a culture that ensures healthy behavior, there's certain behaviors that you expect to see. You expect to see trust, loyalty, and respect within those people. You expect your employees to be engaged and empowered, and we're going to talk more about engagement. There should be regular and open communication. We mentioned that as well. There's that commitment to improving, where you're fostering creativity and innovation, as well as this idea of shared learning and knowledge that we talked about as well. And one of the things that's really evident is when you look at different research, what we're seeing is very common findings and very common outcomes between these different pieces of research, which is really encouraging. There were two studies done, one by the Journal of Applied Psychology, another one done by the University of Canterbury as part of their employee resilience scale. And what they found, and what's generally been accepted, is that employee engagement is linked to better performance. And so being able to increase employee engagement is going to help you with your strong financial performance, increase your customer satisfaction, as well as decreasing employee turnover. People don't want to leave where you're working. I'm sure you've all worked in companies where you'd like to work there. And so making sure that you're taking proactive steps to improve the resilience of your organization by fostering a work culture that promotes resilient behaviors is also really important. But take a look at both of these studies. The University of Canterbury has this employee resilience scale that is publicly available as well. Another good resource is a woman named Melissa Agnes. She is a crisis management consultant, and she has some really nice free things, both on her website as well as on YouTube. But she talks about 6 characteristics of a healthy culture and the importance of having the right corporate culture for managing a crisis. So she's kind of looking at this corporate culture from the crisis management lens, but I think it has validity, on as far as how crisis management impacts your overall organizational resilience as well. So one of the things she says is to make issues management an integral part of corporate culture. And if you're not sure what issues management is, we do have a whole webinar about it, but it really talks about horizon scanning, forecasting, looking ahead at things that might happen, that have a possibility of happening, or are perhaps potential crises or things that are just small things now, but that might grow. You need to instill a mindset that instinctively finds the positive opportunities within negative incidents. So we talked about that a little bit already. Learning from mistakes, valuing learning over blame. When something happens, how can we learn from it? And it's part of that continual improvement as well. looking at finding ways to build and strengthen your trust with your stakeholders. And remember, stakeholders, in a lot of the standards, they're calling them interested parties, but it's the same thing. Who are your internal and external stakeholders? And how can we make sure we have trust with all of those different groups? Making sure your employees are trained and also empowered. Empowerment's been a big word, along with engagement. They need to be able to act fast or act quickly in times of negative incidents. So this whole idea of being agile and adaptive and having the right people, it doesn't just happen. It has to be something that you intentionally do. Making sure that you're prepared with scalable and dynamic programs to manage risk. So looking at any different way, all the different ways you can manage risk, whether it's through enterprise risk management or whether you're looking at business continuity or crisis management or information security, any of the ways that you're reacting with your own organization, how can you make sure that you're best prepared in that aspect? But the final one, I think, is the one that we probably struggle with the most. It's easy to say it, but it's harder to do it, and that is to embrace change. By the way, nobody likes change, so how do you embrace that? How can you be flexible and adaptable so that you're not saying that that's just the way we do things around here in a negative manner versus that's the way we do things around here in a positive manner? And in really continuing to find ways to meet your stakeholders' ever-expanding expectations. And this becomes really important because your stakeholders are also your people that you're selling to and the people that are buying your services. And so you need to be able to make sure that you're meeting their expectations if you're going to continue to stay in business. Schein identified some different perspectives or trends, what we call cultural perspectives. And there's 3 primary ones. And then he did some research to see, what kinds of support is this? So the first one is called a strong culture. And this is where you've got consensus on the values that drive the organization and with an intensity that's recognizable even to outsiders. And this sounds really great until you say, oh, this can also be negative. For example, street gangs. You can have a very strong culture, but it can be awful. But there is modest research to support that this supports good performance in your organization. Another cultural perspective is that your culture is only good if it fits or aligns itself with the industry or the organization's strategy. So a manufacturing organization's culture is going to look different than a retail organization's or a healthcare organization, for example. But this research only predicts short-term performance. So it's really meaning that you might be doing a project or something, some kind of short-term initiative, and that might work for that, but it probably won't work long-term. Of course, the adaptive culture is one that encourages confidence and risk-taking amongst employees, that you have leadership that produces change, and that you focus on the changing needs of your customers, like we've talked about before, and that you're able to facilitate change to meet the needs of your constituents. So notice that we're talking a lot about adaptability, agility, and being able to manage change, which is a common theme throughout here. And this is where there is research that shows that an adaptive culture promotes long-term performance, which counterbalancing says that if you're not adaptive, you actually can make your own organization vulnerable to risk. So if you have a culture in your organization that's not adaptive, it's actually a risk to your organizations. Whether it's because it's bureaucratic or political, whatever it is, if you're not adaptive, you're not going to be able to respond to internal demands or a changing environment. Melissa Agnes also talks about the way you look at risk, your organization, whether it's risk averse or risk tolerant, or how you look at risk is going to directly impact the way you respond to risk and the way you overcome it, or, of course, not. So a culture of no comment is going to resist communication as long as possible in a crisis. And what is that? What is the impact of that? Versus a culture that embraces communication is going to embrace the opportunity to connect through stakeholders when times gets tough as well. So looking at, kind of these 2 spectrums of looking at risk and how it impacts your communication styles. When we're looking at organizational resilience and culture, we're going to look next at some of the implications for leadership. One is a preoccupation with failure. Let me just step back for 1 minute. Really, when you're looking at all of these, we're going to be looking at 6 different principles or 5 different principles. When people understand what errors are unacceptable, when they understand the complexity of your issues, when they're willing to listen and fight to bounce back, these are types of behaviors that you see that are going to help with your being able to be resilient and how you're going to be able to manage when you have different bad things happen to you. So that preoccupation is failure. It could include things like talking about the different types of failures the organization should regard as detrimental in terms of safety or the organization's performance. It could include expecting, supporting, and rewarding employee behavior, such as reporting errors and mistakes, as these are weak signals or subtle cues that could be signs of an impending issue or crisis or disaster. Weaving this idea of a reluctance to simplify value into your organization's culture would most likely involve leaders pushing for more information about the causes of small failures, as these small failures, again, could signal bigger organizational problems. Really being sensitive to your operations, so where you have leaders who are willing to listen to those that are closest to the hazards, that are closest to the operations aspects, where they can then learn more about what the potential problems might be and be able to react accordingly before they happen. A commitment to resilience implies that leaders should build into their organizational culture ways of continuing operations under extreme circumstances. This could mean building redundancy into the organization structure through cross-training, being able to manage mass amounts of information exchanged when you have a lot of change, and really leaders who encourage widespread freedom of speech within their organizations really help to facilitate information exchange and this idea of situational awareness. And then finally, this idea of deference to expertise, where you have where leadership is most effective when it's shared, and that those with the most amount of expert knowledge have the authority and resources to act, which ties back to our concepts of empowerment as well. So let's take a minute and stop for a poll. And how would you describe your organization's culture?
We have about half the responses in. We'll keep it open for a few more seconds here. Okay, we've got about 75% of the folks in. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
I find it really interesting. And then, by the way, again, I commend you. Those of you that have no idea, maybe you haven't even thought about it. So hopefully we're giving you some information here to think about. And I'm also really pleased that there wasn't very many people with this fit culture. It seemed kind of an odd thing to me. It's something I hadn't really been that familiar with. And it makes sense that you see that you're kind of a combination of each one. And we're going to be talking about, you know, especially in larger organizations, you might have an overall corporate culture, but you also might have subcultures that exist as well. So thank you for sharing with that. One thing I wanted to mention that maybe you haven't considered in the past, but we're becoming a global society every day, and we're bringing different cultures together on a working basis. So whether that's, you know, a global society within your company at one location, or whether the fact that you're a global organization and that you have to work with different parts of your company that are in different countries. And I just wanted to share this. This is the map of the world from the Australian point of view. Looks very different from the map of the world from, you know, a U.S. or North America point of view, or even South America point of view. Obviously, if you flip it north and south, you notice that south is at the top versus north. And this is sometimes what happens to us when we are used to viewing things from our own perspectives. And when you have national cultures and you have a global organization, and if you're selling to people internationally, you're going to need to understand the impact of national cultures. Samuel Huntington had put together, identified what he said were major cultural groups, and he identified them as Western Orthodox, Islamic, African, Latin American, I don't even know what Cynic is, but Hindu, Buddhist, and Japanese entities. And what he did was he said these are groups of people with common beliefs, and they're usually accompanied or driven by ethnic, religious, or geographical affiliation. This is probably where we get a lot of stereotypes. And notice he didn't identify every area as well. So it's just there's other people that have gone ahead and looked and studied national cultures as well. But just giving you an idea that just because you think in a certain way doesn't mean everybody else thinks the way you do. And when you're looking at your company and how you work within your organization, peer-to-peers, that matters. And it also matters when you're talking organization to organization, as well as within your own organization in different locations. So understanding national culture is important. As I said, we're becoming increasingly global. And value systems and general traits tend to surface in ways that sometimes lead to misunderstanding and ineffectiveness. And this is one of the things I think I've learned the most in the traveling that I have done with ICOR, with our different training partners globally, and understanding that what works in one country doesn't necessarily work in another country. And even in our meetings where I sit on several different international standards organizations committees as an expert, hearing perspectives from different people from different countries is really enlightening. And sometimes you just don't even realize how your own upbringing impacts how you think about things. And if you're surrounded by people that are only just like you, how that impacts how your organization functions as well. And just being careful that these differences can lead to different cultural expectations. And if you're not taking them into account, it can really impact your organization's resilience. We talked briefly about changing organizational culture and that it's going to take time and commitment. In our case study today, literally they started 20 years before they had a disaster. Now, not that they weren't impacted by their positive culture during those 20 years, but that initiative, they really attributed their success to recovering from that disaster due to work efforts that they had started 20 years earlier. And it is a choice, and it is deliberate. It's not something that just happens. Negative things happen automatically, but trying to change in a positive way does take time and commitment. One of the things you're going to need to do is, if you're in top management, you need to employ the right management team, and they need to have this idea of shared vision and sense of reality. And this really becomes a challenge in corporations today because we have leadership teams that change over so often that it's really difficult to sustain organizational culture, much less try to make change. But you need to have some sort of a measurement of your strengths and weaknesses. What do you think you're good at? And what are some ways that you need to improve? And then once you've identified that, try to identify strategies and actions and make a plan of action for implementation to try to say, what are the ways that we're going to try to change organizational culture? In order to do that, you need to, like I said a minute ago, you need to periodically assess your culture. And that could be because of changes due to globalization, to workforce diversity, to changes or advances in technology, as well as maybe changes in your risk climate, depending on what it is that you do. But you can really look at one of the ways that you can measure culture and how happy employees are in your organization is simply by looking at absence numbers. Are employees maximizing their sick days? Are they using them all up or their PTO? And what's your rate of turnover of key talent? And how does this turnover impact the internal knowledge of your organization? How many people and with what frequency turn down emergency assignments or overtime? This really helps you to measure your engagement. And just to let you know, I'm sorry, I clicked twice there, but just to let you know, there's many assessment tools, and we're not going to talk about those tools here today. But you can even talk to your HR people to find out some of the ways that they might be assessing, and maybe how they hire, how they fire, what are some of the reasons for that. That all has to do with different ways to measure those things as well. But they're out there, and you can find them. So I mentioned in the introduction that we will be talking about the fact that your culture itself might be a source of risk to your organization. If you have in certain situations, a corporate culture can actually lead to its own crisis, or might be the cause of something else that might not have been a crisis, but because of your corporate culture and the way either the way it behaves or doesn't behave, or is able to make decisions or not able to make decisions, it could affect your response to an incident, especially if you're really looking at from a crisis management point of view here. If your organization doesn't believe in preparing for things ahead of time and you experience that frustration on a regular basis, it certainly can, your culture can be a source of risk. You often hear people talk about, and we just can't keep top management support. Well, that is a symptom that your corporate culture has a problem. And does your corporate culture allow it to react quickly to changing circumstances? If you can't react quickly, then how are you going to manage something that happens to you, whether it's positive or negative? It doesn't have to be, a disaster, an emergency. It can be a change in in what your people that purchase your products or services are looking for. There's a study that was done by Crisis Navigator that talked about corporate culture as a source of crisis, and they looked at some situations that might be adding to the risk. And the first one was that your corporate culture does not correlate with major changes in your society. So in other words, especially if you're a global organization and you try to take what works, I'm in Chicago, so what works in Chicago and make it work in Singapore might not happen, might not work in the Philippines. So looking at an example of this is there was the transition of the Czech society itself from a planned to a market economy, which in the field of corporate culture, many companies have not managed to cope with yet. So if you had a company based or working in the Czech society, that might have had an impact on you, and especially with all the changes in that part of the world. So understanding that aspect is really important. Changes in company growth. This is especially evident you see in a lot of small companies that grow quickly, and where they started off with a group of entrepreneurs and people that were really tight, and then they really grew quickly, or they grew over time, but there wasn't that same relationship and that same identity with who the organization is and how they started. And a company where my daughter works, their CEO has an email that he sends out every, I don't know if it's Monday morning or Tuesday morning. I tend to think it's Tuesday morning. And he has his message for the week. And what he's trying to do is to close that gap between the company and the C-level people, and trying to keep that real for who they are and what they do. And it's really a cultural thing where nobody even schedules meetings during that time, because they all want to read what comes out when it comes out. We talked a little bit about this existence of subcultures, and this really happens when you have a larger company as well, where you have a culture that exists. And I often compare this to, we all have gone through school, and that life of middle school or junior high through high school, where you've got different groups of people in your student body, and a group, they call it the subculture. You can have a negative effect, but this is where you're seeing a major deviation in culture from more your senior and top management to the people that are working at the operational or tactical levels. And this is where you see this lack of support for company strategy, this idea of company loyalty, or even to the intentional creation of problems just because the subculture is not happy in the organization and they're trying to get noticed for some reason, to make change. Obviously, a merger acquisition wreaks havoc on corporate culture, just trying to merge two different groups, and then you lose people as well through firing and people leaving. It changes the communication styles and create problems, and it just leads a lot of times in an unwillingness to cooperate in this new environment. We talk about having leaders, and when you have managers instead of leaders, this really changes from managers focusing on centralized decision-making versus leadership that's looking at motivation and vision and being able to draw people together versus people that are kind of micromanaging you. And then a change in strategy or future plans. you have new products or services, or we're gonna be moving in a new way, and you've restructured. This requires the support of everybody, and if you don't have a corporate culture that can support a change in strategy, you're going to need to look at that. Obviously, a change in ownership and leadership, and this is where we talk about these challenges where we see the C-level people just kind of, they're there for 3 years, they're in and out. It really does impact the culture of your organization, and companies need to consider that and looking at that conflict between the new management and the old management. And then the last thing that they talk about is this extensive generation replacement of employees, where you have different age groups in your organization that are kind of stuck together, and they're not willing to work between each other. And we've seen a trend more recently to, once people hit 50, 52, all of a sudden they're gone, and they're just replacing them with younger people. And what is that? How does that impact your organization? Some of the symptoms that were identified is this absence of support in the area of company goals or achievement, or people just not identifying with the company goals. People preferring their personal interests and goals. So I just want to do my job, I just want to get done when I need to get done. I don't want to be worrying about anything else. Obviously, problems in communication and cooperation, if you're seeing people having trouble cooperating and communicating. And then non-acceptance of your colleagues as internal customers. We talked about understanding those stakeholders and interested parties, both internally and externally. And this emergence of conflicts, whether it's over budgets or just power and control, is also really important. You'll see symptoms of problems of people working in teams. And those of you that are on crisis teams or any other sort of incident response teams, that's a big symptom that you need to address right away. If you can't work in a team, whether it's a project management team or a team that's dealing with an incident, that's a symptom that you need to work and you need to be fixed. This idea of interested in power, that subgroup idea, that development of cliques, how does your organization work? Do the same people eat lunch together every day, or do people mingle and get to know each other? Does your environment promote creativity or innovation? If a symptom is really a problem if you're not oriented towards your customers and your needs. And then, of course, there's the intentional blocking of any change whatsoever. Just say no probably isn't the best thing that you want to see. So our last poll is your organization's culture a source of risk? What do you think?
Responses are beginning to come in. We'll leave it open here for a few more seconds, I think. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll here.
So this is really interesting. Communication systems are supposed to be the most important. I hate to always say most important, but if you're doing good times, communication's important, and during bad times, communication's even more important. And here we see that your top challenge is problems in communicating. And then the second one is working in teams. And I have to say that, I'm in my 50s, and even when I was in college, this concept, this business idea that you have to be able to work in teams, and all the way through my kids going to school, you have to work in teams. Everything's a team thing. So if you're seeing symptoms of people having problems working in teams, even after all of these years, I really think that that's a huge symptom of a problem. And it's tough. I think, since 2008, I don't know that businesses have recovered to going back to work the way they did before, and maybe a lot of that's in a positive way, but I think in a negative way, we're all still doing more work than we did before, meaning that, they let people go, and if you got to keep your job, you had to do more than you did before for the same amount of money and the same amount of time. which really hampers your creativity and really stops you from being able to do your best work. So I think these, if you've identified these things already, and you need to start thinking about how can I, in my job, try to make improvements in these things. And that was one of the challenges I had at the beginning of the webinar, was for you to think, okay, why am I here? I can't probably change culture anyway. But you can change how you interact with people. You can improve the way you communicate. You can improve the way you work in teams. You can make sure that you're not part of the subculture going on, the people that are stopping and blocking things, and that you can bring people along with you in those positive behaviors. And if you have people that work for you, making sure that you're the type of leader who helps to support creativity, that increases the communication, where you have, open ideas of sharing, where you share knowledge and information, where you learn from your mistakes. I hear so many scary stories of companies from people who are just so reluctant to share that they've made a mistake because they feel that there's going to be a reprisal versus a learning. So think about how you lead in your organization, in the position where you are, and how you can try to enable some of those positive aspects to help improve the culture where you are. So as promised, I wanted to finish up with the case study, and you can find this whole case study. We have the exact URL, but it was done by ResearchGate. And Regional Hospital, that's the actual name of the hospital. For a while when I was reading this, I thought they were just using a generic name, but it's a hospital in Iowa. And a few years ago, Iowa had a huge, huge flood, and it wiped out the whole city. So this was a flood of historic magnitude. It severely damaged the hospital, facing it to close its doors for the first time in its 90-year history. Within minutes, the flooding destroyed pretty much all of their critical functions and systems, including their laboratory, their pharmacy, their information services, their food services, and all of their mechanical and electrical systems. Not much was missed. It was estimated that there was going to be over $200 million US dollars in damages. But the success story is that they reopened in 5 months versus an estimated 24 months that they thought at the beginning. And the really, I think, crazy thing is that they did not lose any employees or medical staff. Think about that. Even if over 5 months, they didn't lose anybody. So what they did, when they had their post-mortem discussions, when they successfully reopened, the senior management team spent many hours discussing and trying to identify the significant variables that they believed allowed for their amazing response. Now, one of the things I want to mention, and we'll mention it a couple of different times, is that at the time of the flood, the hospital had an operating surplus. And this is a big deal because a lot of hospitals are not operating at a surplus. And when you're responsible for the nurturing care of the people in your community, it's tough when you have your own disaster and you don't have the money or the funds to manage that. But they had an operating surplus, and they have recognized that this is a major factor in their ability to recover. However, they also believe that it was also tied to other initiatives that seemed to prepare the organization and increase its capacity to respond adaptively when all their organizational systems disappeared in a matter of hours. There was general consensus that their organizational culture played a key role in their success. So beginning in the 1990s, Regional Hospital initiated the development of an intentional culture. It was a real initiative that played out over the next 20 years. And this work that they did began with a focus on understanding both the needs and the expectations of their customers. And based on that understanding, they put together an organizational infrastructure to guide the work that they did. And this infrastructure included the mission, vision, and values, and a dynamic strategy for bringing each element of the model to life. The work to clarify the mission and values and to ultimately articulate an aspirational vision began with the senior team, but it did not end there. There was an iterative, participative process that involved all the key stakeholder groups in the socialization and fine-tuning of the ideas that was included in these frameworks. And then once these were finalized, they put together a proactive and ambitious communication strategy to bring this to life. and to make sure it was visible and became that fundamental underpinning and guidepost for all the other initiatives that they had in the future. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold as well, so my apologies. So they put together value statements. Their first value statement had to do with strong and shared leadership. And they have these, they call them their culture anchors. They said, we value strong leadership on the part of each and every member of our team. We believe that shared leadership will result in health and hospital services which are innovative, creative, and highly competitive. Shared and strong leadership, or strong shared leadership, will result from informed risk-taking, creativity, and a desire to meet or exceed customer needs through tested innovation. I think that one all by itself would make me really happy and want to work there. But they went on to talk about teamwork and collaboration, which is interestingly enough, when you saw on your risk factors that teamwork was a problem, an issue for a lot of you. They say we recognize that health and hospital care is a collaborative process, which we perform in partnership with one another, physicians, nurses, and other direct clinical and diagnostic caregivers assisted by support and administrative staff. They talk about commitment to contribute, and they said that we recognize that by providing health and hospital services in today's environment requires each and every member of the team to contribute to the best of his or her ability, and this frequently requires personal courage, acceptance of responsibility, persistence, and a belief that one's contribution will make a difference. They also believe that we must act collectively as good corporate citizens. Our work, both individual and organizational, must be performed as good neighbors with community service and responsibility being the underlying values. And I know this is a hospital, but I think if you look at your organization where it is, that citizenship can still remain a part of a value statement for your organization. They also value high performance and the continuous pursuit of personal excellence. This value is adopted with the understanding that everything we do can and will be improved. It is with this pursuit of continuous improvement that we will achieve the most efficient, effective, knowledgeable, competent, skilled, and productive work possible. And like all organizations, they need to talk about ethics. We understand that decisions and action in today's health and hospital environments are increasingly complex and challenging, and that we are committed to decisions and actions based on honesty, integrity, and sensitivity to personal values. Of course, they need to be caring. Because they are a hospital, they need to carry out all of our interactions with one another and our customers, clients, and patients with compassion, care, recognition, and respect. And lastly, we believe that quality is the continuous process of meeting or exceeding all of our customers' needs and expectations, this idea of continuous improvement. They took that one step further and said that we're going to have our standard of service. And this is what they post, of course, like you've seen in many organizations, posted on their walls. But they also took these standards of service and have developed iterative processes that were over time hardwired into their systems, including how they recruit and how they do their performance reviews, as well as they look to include the strategic use of stories, really to shift the culture conversation and to exemplify or pull forward aspects of their desired culture. So with the acronym RESPECT, they started with respect, that they're going to treat our customers with respect, courtesy, and concern. They're going to enable solutions, so they're going to actively work to resolve your customer complaints. They're going to serve as ambassadors by demonstrating pride in being associated with Regional Hospital. They're going to take pride in their personal appearance and that of our facility. They're going to deliver the service that each customer expects. They're going to respect privacy and confidentiality, which is, of course, a legal requirement, but not always easy to do within the needs of their customers. And they're going to maintain positive relationships with their coworkers in this idea of teamwork. When they looked at the integrated emphasis, they really were looking at integrating an active emphasis on employee engagement and teamwork. They were using specific methodologies and tools that could be used to understand work at a process level and then to execute improvement efforts and on measurement. And I can't include all of this information here in this webinar, but I really encourage you to read the whole study. And early on, there was a critical recognition that the only way to achieve competitive levels of customer satisfaction was by working concurrently on improving employee satisfaction. So in order for their customers to be happy, their employees needed to be happy. So they put together a comprehensive employee engagement strategy that permeated every aspect of the organization. And of course, they figured they needed to measure performance. If they were going to be doing all these things, they needed to measure how they were doing, and that's part of their continual improvement. And they put together a balanced scorecard methodology with goals in it. And they were an early adopter in the healthcare sector of the balanced scorecard methodology, and really over the years developed a really sophisticated and institutional approach to their measurement and how they do it. And one of the hallmarks of this approach was a commitment to the transparency of the business information. So this information that they collected, they shared with everyone in the organization, and then they talked about about the measures themselves and the work that supported them. So one of their goals is on people, and they want to achieve employee retention of 85%. They don't want to have a lot of turnover. They also wanted to achieve 90th percentile performance on customer satisfaction. When they're looking at quality and safety, they wanted to achieve 90th percentile performance on the CMS publicly reported information. This is something that they have to publicly do because they're a healthcare organization. Looking at growth and innovation, they wanted to achieve outpatient volume growth of 3% and then 50 additional points in their different strategic growth areas. And lastly, they wanted to make sure they had an operating budget surplus of 4.5%, recognizing again that they needed that operating surplus in order to survive before. It really brought them back after 5 months instead of 24 months. So the organization development initiatives were focused on multiple organizational levels, and they included interventions ranging from planning to awareness building to skill development. They also resulted in changes to how they planned and measured their processes, to the organizational structure itself. And really, they looked at all of their human resource systems, including how they did recruitment, performance evaluation, compensation, as well as their stakeholder communication strategies. They looked at everything. The very ways in which their individuals were organized to engage in the work and the improvement of the work. The success of these initiatives have been recognized by many external sources. For example, Regional Hospital was nationally recognized in the U.S. for its high-quality care as a winner of the American Hospital Association's Quest for Quality Prize in 2007. This is the highest quality honor awarded to the hospital industry. They also are a Thomson Reuters 100 top hospitals. They're recognized as Modern Healthcare's 100 best places to work in healthcare. And in the state of Iowa, they're the first magnet-designated hospital for outstanding nursing care. So taken together, the approaches that we've described here led to the development of a culture that gave the organization a platform which supported achieving the performance levels required to compete in market share and really to compete for talent as well for their hospital. They did have best-in-country recovery. So the hospital CEO was able to talk to employees about showing what a best-in-country recovery looks like. The crisis afforded the employees the unique opportunity to look beyond their regular roles and work together regardless of titles, skills, and expertise. Some of the employees were put to work on helping to restore the facility. Some were temporarily deployed to other hospitals in the region, and some were temporarily deployed to not-for-profit agencies in the community that were supporting the victims of the flood. Because remember, their location wasn't available. They had to continue the work that they could in other locations. But no matter what the role they were asked to provide, the crisis response called for an enormous amount of self-directed decision-making and action. The employees rose to the occasion, and they were able to work effectively with great autonomy in an environment of heightened ambiguity. This idea of being able to make decisions when you don't know exactly what's happening is a descriptor or an outcome of more resilient organizations and more resilient leaders. One of the things that they kind of unforeseen was they had the opportunity to review and improve their organizational processes. So they thought what they put in place, but then when they actually had a big disaster, they were able to see that, you know what, we've got places where we can make some improvements. And this is really important for them. They also had work groups where they had the time to assess their own processes and equipment, and they looked at opportunities to increase those efficiencies in service. And remember that they had people working at other hospitals, and when they came back, they were eager to share the best practices and new approaches to which they'd been exposed. Now, I understand a hospital is not going to be like a business. You're not going to be deployed to go work in another company while your company is having a problem, but you might be deployed to work in another location of your company, and you might be able to learn things there during the time that you're there that can help when you return. And this opportunity of learning led to the foundation for a development of a cutting-edge innovation center, which has become a cultural and operational centerpiece within that region as well as within the industry. One thing I want to mention is that they were prepared. And we got our little Boy Scout here, but they were prepared. They had emergency preparedness protocols and procedures, and their continuity and recovery plans played an essential role in that. They also, remember, they had the money. They had those contingency resources available. But it wasn't just that. And that's really the focus of this study, is that, yes, they had these things in place, and they were required by law to have them in place. But it wasn't the only reason why they survived. Culture had a huge impact on that, and really how people behaved during that time. And it wasn't something you could just implement during the disaster. It had to be the way that they behaved all the way along. So just to summarize, culture impacts performance during business as usual and impacts how an organization responds to a crisis. An unhealthy culture can actually be a source of risk for an organization. You should understand your own culture and improve it, and assessing your strengths and weaknesses is a great place to start. And remember that national cultures can be a significant factor in organizational cultures, and as well as individual attributes, and you need to understand those. As I mentioned, you can learn more in taking our whole crisis management communication professional course. I also wanted to announce, this is kind of our first official announcement on this, but we're putting together a series of 25 courses, and they are all based on different competencies, and the culture course is under organizational behavior, and this will be part of our new path for certification for our Certified Organizational Resilience certification. Lastly, these are the resources that we used, and I think, if you can, go ahead and read each one of these. They're really interesting, and they're publicly available. And lastly, just wanted to welcome you to attend our next webinars. The one in March coming up, we'll talk about our new organizational resilience certification, and then in April, we're going to shift to data center capacity planning. And in May, we will take a sneak peek at the 2019 updates, the 22301 and 22313, which will literally be the week after I get back from Delft, where we will be finalizing 22301, and then 22313 will be finalized in September. And then you can see the rest of the webinars from there. It looks like we are out of time, but if you have questions, Margot will be collecting those questions that you submitted, and we will be sharing those after the webinar. Remember that the webinar has been recorded and that you will be able to access the webinar either Friday or Monday of next week. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.